Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. I spent my weekend at the British Museum this week, and it is my second time visiting, and I feel that there really aren't enough British things in it to call it the British Museum. I cry every time I see the lost carotid, and seeing the mummies and ancient Mesopotamian items just makes me a little bit sad, shoved in a corner in a museum in a country that stole them, so that feels great. Speaking of the British stealing things, let's head over to South Africa this week, where we are focusing on a Zulu monster and one that is truly epic from this part of the world. We're looking at the fearsome Inkanyamba from Zulu mythology this week. A precursor that I must include in this episode, and to be honest, a lot of episodes, is that I only speak English and German, and the only helpful guide I have for pronunciation is Google and YouTube. So please forgive me if I butcher pronunciations and you're from this part of the world, speak the language. I am sorry, I will try my best. These are not languages I know, I'm afraid. And don't leave me shirty comments saying so. If you want to help me get better and you know how to pronounce something, don't gatekeep that. Leave me a kind phonetic note and I'll get it for next time. I'm trying to learn with limited resources sometimes, so please, just be kind. Moving swiftly on, what is the Inkanyamba? These are typically described as huge eel-like serpents with a horse's head, with a bladed fin, mane and fins. And it is sometimes noted that it has stripes like a zebra, or shiny iridescent scales. Sometimes it's got sharp teeth like a barracuda, but the tellings are also quite vague, bar the fact it's a serpent or an eel with a horse head. They are massive, as I said, but I mean really big. In most interpretations, they are considered to be around 9 metres long, which is about 30 feet, and are even mentioned sometimes to have bat-like wings with around the same wingspan. In some legends, though, they're completely invisible, so you may never see this slimy nightmare anyway. The Inkanyamba is considered a species, not a specific lone monster. There are just a few that are prolific and solo in certain places, but they are aquatic rain monsters, living mostly in waterfalls and lakes, with the most famous and feared of them all living in Howick Falls in South Africa. They're also known to migrate in the summer months, and when they do, they fly over the land and in their path leave storms in their wake. Speaking of which, they do have mystical powers, including the big one, which is control over the weather. They can conjure storms, tornadoes, hail, rain and thunder. When the males look for a mate, they are said to cause huge tornadoes, and when angered, bitter storms that can cause houses to lift from their foundations and rivers to burst their banks. As well as this, they can change their size, and when they leave their watery home, grow to massive sizes to traverse the landscape through the air, only to shrink back down when comfortably back in the water. It's common for them to mistake reflective or blue roofs as pools of water, which means the locals tend to paint their roofs black in order to avoid their attention. You also typically want to avoid any attention from this sea snake. It's said to meet its gaze is an invitation to death, or at least a serious misfortune. The locals are so scared of this monster that they avoid saying its name, so I think I'm definitely invoking an attack any day now. The Inkanyamba doesn't generally eat people, but they are carnivorous and they are not fond of us, so they certainly wouldn't turn down a human snack from time to time if available. However, they usually eat pigs, sheep, cows and goats, which locals will sacrifice to appease their stormy natures too. They are considered malevolent though, so it's a good idea to stay as far away as possible and avoid attracting them at all costs. Now, we assume that they are immortal and invulnerable, as there are no tellings of them ever being defeated or killed, and we know there are both male and female variants, and they mate, which we assume is in the usual reptilian or fishy fashion with eggs. They are incredibly territorial though, and some of them have been spotted fighting with each other viciously. Whether it's over terrain or mates, we are not entirely sure. In most legends though, the Inkanyamba is depicted as a spiritual being, between the living and the ancestral spirits of the land. They are sometimes seen as a guardian or conduit for divine justice, capable of both protecting and punishing communities. They also have that influence over the fertility of the land and the well-being of those who depend on these natural resources within these local communities too. Now, moving on to etymology, the word Inkanyamba is from the Zulu language, meaning Lord of the Waters. However, there are some other names for it, such as Inkosayama Yamanzi, meaning the same, or Inkanyamba I Negosi Yamagozi, meaning the Inkanyamba Lord of Storms. However, it is usually referred to as just Inkanyamba or Inkanyenzi, which is another version of the word Inkanyamba. For their history, the legend is ancient, and we know this because they've been depicted in ancient cave paintings in KwaZulu-Natal with horns, crests along their backs, and water spewing from their mouths. Archaeologists have actually come to refer to them as rain animals due to their association with these summer storms because of these depictions. They were actually first spotted though in 1962 by a game ranger, and again in 1974 and in 1981 by a caretaker. Then in the 1990s it became bigger news, as in 1995 there was a spotting in Howick Falls, and in 1996 a local newspaper offered a reward for anyone who could produce photographic evidence of them. 2 photographs were published, but neither of them were great at showing the monster and were accused of being hoaxes. However, this stirred a huge interest in the Inkanyamba myth, and in May of the same year there was a rumour that the South African government were trying to capture one and take it to a protected area. The local Zulu population were horrified and scared it might cause issues locally with the creature trying to fight back or get revenge for it being displaced. Of course, there's not much to back this up that it ever happened either. A year later, in 1997, another mythical creature was spotted in these parts, the Mamlambo, a giant crocodilian creature, making KwaZulu-Natal a hotspot for monster hunting. I'll cover this in another episode down the line for a full investigation. As late as 1998, the local residents blamed violent Inkanyamba for a horrendous storm where literally thousands of people lost their homes, and is linked to the yearly mating migration tornado of this monster. So what could this monster potentially be? Well, the theory is that this is a giant species of eel, which do exist. Eels do get big, especially in hotter climates. However, they definitely cannot control the weather or fly, so that is yet to be explained by big science. However, what we do know is that they are a good hint to respect local wildlife and nature as well as the natural balance. They are also really impactful in South African identity, especially within the KwaZulu-Natal region, which was dominated by the British back in 1843, where the Brits pushed out the native Zulu and Xhosa people, and the rest of South Africa was settled in by the Dutch throughout the 1600s to establish Asian trading posts as stopovers. So any legends from this part of the country that predate these colonialisms are really important and are treasured by the locals, and certainly should be seen as a flagship of South African and Zulu heritage and history. Now, moving on to mythical comparisons, We don't have a crazy amount of sea serpents that are malevolent without them becoming godly at some point to compare these two. Of course, we have the Norse Jormungandr, the world serpent who exists across the world's oceans and generally doesn't like people too much. However, technically, they are a god and they are sentient, so the comparison is just more that they have a giant snake body and they live in bodies of water. We also have the Inkanyamba, the water snake monster from the Amazonian forest, who protects the natural world and the waters of her home, as well as being a mega big anaconda-like snake. It is also said that she controls the weather and is able to shapeshift, so this is probably our closest match. I covered the Inkanyamba not too long ago. If you're interested, go check out that episode. I also covered Jormungandr at some point, but it feels like a very long time ago. But if you're interested in either of those, check out their own episodes. Now, on to modern media. We do not have anything specific for the Inkanyamba, I'm afraid. I filled this out with mostly sea serpent media because I think it's probably the best fit. For art, have a look at independent work this week, as there's not really much going on in terms of older paintings or drawings. There are some really cool bits on DeviantArt and other such platforms, so go have a look what these cool monsters are supposedly looking like. In movies, we have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Dragons, a Fantasy Made Real, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Atragon, The Sea Serpent, and Godzilla v Kong, The New Empire. For TV, we have Mystery Hunters, Touche Turtle and Dum Dum, The X-Files, Avatar The Last Airbender, Primeval New World, Babar, The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Bozo, the world's most famous clown, Care Bears, Gertie the Dinosaur, The Secret Saturdays, The Greatest American Hero, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, Beanie and Cecil, Ninjago, Ultraman Diner, The Life and Times of Juniper Lee, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Porky Pig, and Encantadia. In video games, we have ones such as Final Fantasy, Dead in Vinland, Hero of Sparta 2, Golden Sun, Age of Mythology, Subnautica, Monster Hunter 4, The Legend of Zelda, The Sims 2, Pokemon, Ultra Kill, Dragon City, Valheim, Octopath Traveler 2, Dwarf Fortress, Pandora's Box, The Walking Zombie 2, Disciples, Might and Magic 4, Kingdom Rush Origins, Horn of the Abyss, Kong Survivor Instinct, Blood Money, Age of Wonders, Crut the Mythic Wings, Bug Fables, Demon Hunter The Return of the Wings, Equestria at War, Dragon Fable, and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. I have a couple of book recommendations this week, including African Mythology by Amadou Sissoko, African Myths by J.K. Jackson, African and Caribbean Tales, Myths and Legends by Wendy Shearer, and the Watkins Book of African Folklore by Helen Nude for some really great looks into the mythology from the beautiful content of Africa. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? Look, you know what I'm going to say, and I stand by, that any river or water creatures have plausible deniability, and I'm sure it's getting boring if you've been listening to the show forever to hear me say this, but we just don't know enough about the water and what lives in it within any of these environments to make a solid judgment. And hey, Nessie in Scotland is a prime example that most of us consider a mythical beast, and there is still a chance we still all want to believe these creatures exist somewhere. With all of these though, of course we want to also say that if they did exist, we would know by now, but that simply isn't true. Look at the amount of creatures we discover on land every year, let alone in deep sea and riverbeds across the planet. We are incredibly lucky to share our world with a lot of creatures we don't know exist, and I believe any sea, river or lake monster could totally be part of this, and you will not convince me otherwise. This is my personal opinion though. You may not agree with me here, but this is the hill I choose to die on. I will be honest though, I don't know if I do want a creature that can kill me in a glance or rip my house off the ground to exist. I think they're super cool, and I think, again, they're a great nod to the South African heritage and folklore. But do I want to be minding my own business when I catch a glimpse of a horse-headed eel looking at me and then I just die? I didn't want to look at that horse-headed eel, man. No. And honestly, you couldn't catch me looking away from such a weird thing either. It's like a car crash. You just can't look away from it. But again, I love the idea of this monster, and I like that there is almost a specific tourist spot where you can go and see one. Although I bet that any local wouldn't take you there on a tour out of fear of disrespecting the beast lurking in the water. Also, you should go look at how it falls, the waterfall, on Google, because it is a gorgeous bit of nature for anything to be living in, but it's also nice to look at too. I wouldn't go there, personally. I don't wish to put that upon myself. But what do you think? Did the Inkanyamba lie in wait, ready to bring rain and curse passers-by? Let me know on social media. I'd love to know what you think about this one. I wasn't dreading covering this one, but I originally found sources to be quite sparse on this monster, and thankfully I managed to find a couple of bits in my massive folklore book collection to help me through this. And I really enjoyed it in the end, so I hope you did too, and if I have any South African listeners, I hope I did this monster proud for you. Next time, we're heading over to a belief system rather than a place, and we are looking at a creature from Hindu mythology. One of the stunning forms of Lord Shiva. Be prepared to gawk in awe of the majestic Sharabha next time on the show. For now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions, suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast. The Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod, and Blue Sky is Myth Monsters. But all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, and you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later, vibes.